Flo Vilmano here as ever, starting off with reactions to the sentencing of the former Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi.
That's right. Let's start by looking at the Italian version of the Huffington Post that says fino in fondo. So we've finally gotten to the bottom of this legal battle, says the Huffington Post. And also La Repubblica, another newspaper, in their editorial, they really applaud this sentencing. And so this article says, well, a lot of people are wondering what's going to happen next. But the key question is really, how could this have happened in the first place? What happened over the last 20 years in this, quote, unfortunate country? How is it that Italy was in the shadow of this enormous power that got completely out of control, a power that was, thought it was omnipotent and eternal? How could this have happened in the middle of Europe in the 21st century? So that's one opinion. But let's look at Il Giornale, which, keep in mind, is owned by Berlusconi's brother. This has this quote, I am innocent. This was a violent sentence. And this paper says that this was a conspiracy theory that won. The whole plot was invented. 32 people testified falsely. So very different opinion there.
Nice and independent. Now, also in the press, clashes in southern Lebanon. This is between the army and gunmen loyal to a radical cleric.
That's right. It's on the front page of the International Herald Tribune today. There's a photo of Lebanese soldiers that were wounded in those clashes. L'Orient Le Jour, the Lebanese paper, points out that this radical Salafist cleric, well, he's nowhere to be seen right now, but the problem still remains. And in their editorial today, they really condemn this attack on the Lebanese army and say that, well, it says that the sectarian violence has brought to light the undeniable truth, and that's that Lebanon is facing a rise in fundamentalism from both the Sunnis and the Shiites, although it does point out that there's a key difference between the two groups. It says that the Sunni radicals, well, they're a minority, they're marginal, they perhaps make a lot of noise, but they are ultimately a lot less dangerous than the Shias, which, well, basically they're talking about Hezbollah here, which has permeated all of Lebanese society, according to this paper.
And this next one's interesting. It's not something I've heard about anyway. The Independent also focusing on tensions between Sunnis and Shiites, but this time in England.
That's right. Now, this is an article in the Independent that points out that Syria has generated a lot of sectarian tension, but in Syria, but also in the UK. And it points out that there are growing concerns that extremist preachers from both, well, the Sunnis and the Shiites, they could be finding fertile ground in this tension. And it looks like at a couple of cases. For instance, in Fulmer, this is an upmarket village in Buckinghamshire, well, there's a former church that's been turned into a very leading Shia mosque. It's called the Al-Muhassin Mosque. And its imam, a certain Sheikh Yasser al-Habib, he's a popular but very controversial figure. He said some very controversial things in the past. He's been very outspoken against Sunnis, saying, for instance, that infants are sorted at birth by a devil who sexually assaults non-Shia children. But this article also points out that on the other side, there have also been some very controversial remarks thrown around. For instance, there at another mosque, a Sunni cleric this time said, well, that Shias were accused of kidnapping and skinning children. He also called on Muslim women to travel to Syria to offer their bodies to rebel fighters. So very controversial comments coming from both sides. And the Independent points out that, well, both sides are afraid that this could really get out of hand.
And finally, Edward Snowden, the whistleblower, of course, continuing to still, well, be all over the newspapers.
That's right, or his absence, perhaps. There's a photo in the Independent that we've been saying a lot about, that empty seat that flight from Moscow to Cuba. He gave the press the slip. So I love the title here, From Russia with an Empty Seat. Now, there's a funny cartoon in South China Morning Post, with a Hong Kong-based paper today, that reveals actually that Snowden sought a job at Booz Allen Hamilton, that U.S. government contractor, for one reason, and that was to gather evidence about the prison program. So you see here one of the bosses at Booz Allen Hamilton interviewing a potential, worker, and he says, so where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? Please don't say Ecuador.
Perfect stuff. Flo, thanks very much. Flo Vilmano with the international papers here on France 24. That was today's international newspapers. Coming up, a new manager for Paris Saint-Germain. That comes up for you in the sport. And in focus today, we've got a special report from our correspondent as he followed the massive 2-week-long military training exercise in Jordan involving 19 nations. The Syria conflict dominating thoughts there. That's in focus after the break here on France 24.